My name is Young O. I am the current chairman of KAPN, and I'm here today to talk about interview process. Today, you may hear from other websites that there are like 3 keys to successful interviews, or sometimes they'll say things like top 10 things you got to remember to have a successful interview. But today in my presentation, I'm calling it the 3 P's, the letter P. And you'll get to see what that really means as I go through. But I really wanted to focus on just 3 simple things that you need to remember in order to have a successful interview. A quick background on myself is that I'm currently an HR manager at Texas Instruments. For the past 4 years, I've been working in different roles in talent development. Prior to those 4 years as an HR manager, I was also an engineer, a process engineer. My actual educational background is in electrical engineering, but 4 years ago I had a career change in which I had to undergo interview processes as well. And so this means a lot to me today to share with you some of my experiences. And I'm going to tailor today's presentation primarily for our Korean American colleagues, because I know as a Korean American what it takes and some of the challenges that we have as a Korean American employees. So, as I discussed, there are 3 P's, and I'm going to outline this in detail. But before I get started, I'm going to tell you what those P's are. Number 1 is to prepare. Remember, preparation is everything, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. Number 2P is to practice. Many of you don't practice enough prior to interview. You think that just by reading and listening, that's enough. But that is absolutely not enough in the world of interview. So we'll talk a little bit about my recommendation on how you're going to practice for an interview. And number 3, one that you probably are not expecting, is power. You may be wondering what I mean by power in this situation, but I'm going to explain that to you in my 3rd section as I talk about the last P. In my opinion, the last P there is especially relevant for our Korean American students and employees who are looking for a new opportunity. Okay. So let's talk about the first P, which I said is to prepare. You need to prepare ahead. What do I mean by that? Number 1, you must understand yourself first. What I mean by that? What is your strength? What is your passion? What kind of work do you want to do that makes you motivated? And you may be thinking as a person that is looking for an opportunity for a job, that you feel like you have to make yourself available for all different situations. But what happens when you allow yourself to just be everything for every company out there is that you lose what makes you very special. But what is going to set you apart from other candidates is when you highlight and when you truly understand what makes you special. And so this is an area that I really want to emphasize to our Korean American students and employees looking for new opportunity, is that think about what your passion is, think about where you want to go, think about your strengths and weaknesses, and be really honest with yourself. This is the first step in preparation. Number 2, for whichever job that you apply for, you must understand that role. Especially as a college student, you're going to have a choice of many different types of jobs out there, some of which you probably never heard of. But before you go to that interview, you need to do your due diligence, study, research, talk to other people in those similar roles in jobs, talk to people at that company, and think about really understanding that position. Why is this important? This is important is because I myself as an HR interview other people, and I am so surprised how many people come to an interview without truly understanding the job they're applying for. And I understand why that happens. It happens because as someone who's looking for a job, you're just busy applying to hundreds of different jobs just so you can have an opportunity to get an interview. But let me assure you, when you go to that one interview, you only have one shot. And that one shot, you must show that you're educated and you put in the effort to understand the job that you're applying for. Number 3, you need to understand the company DNA, and what that company why that company is so different than other competitors. As an interviewee, as an HR manager at Texas Instruments, it actually is very impressive when a candidate comes in and tells me what makes Texas Instruments different than other semiconductor companies. And why is that impressive? Because that shows that this person is prepared and took the effort to understand and do their homework. And think about that. That tiny thing that you do ahead of the interview means a lot to a person doing the interview. Lastly, whatever company that you study, you must understand the entire environment of that industry, right? So if you're going into a service industry, read and research the general trends and challenges that's ahead of that service industry. For the industry that I represent a technology industry, and more specifically, I represent an industry called semiconductor manufacturing. So if you're going to come interview for Texas Instruments, I would want you to understand the general trends in semiconductor, who my competitors are, and where is TI headed to win businesses down the road. Same thing can be said, let's say if you're going to go interview for retail business. Well, you need to know where the retail business are, how Amazon is playing a big role in retail business, and how it is evolving consumer behavior. So no matter what industry you're going into, as a college student, you may not know what that could be, but make sure you spend the time and effort to understand the industry, the future, and the general trends that are facing that industry. So now I'm going to move over to tip number 2, practice. Remember, first P was to prepare. Now I'm shifting over to practice. So what do I mean by practice? How am I only talking about practicing a mock interview? Many of you have an opportunity at your university to have a mock interview, which is a practicing interview process with someone at the college level. Let me explain to you what it means to practice in my experience. Number 1, you need to practice your responses. There are some top 10 interview questions that comes up very often. And you need to be prepared to understand how you're going to respond to that. Another thing is you got to know your elevator pitch. When you first meet someone, there's a really good opportunity and a chance that that person is going to say something along the lines of, "Hey, nice to meet you. Can you tell me something about yourself?" And you need to be prepared to introduce yourself. You need to be prepared to talk about what sets you apart from other candidates. Okay, so really practice and think about those. Number 2, and this is something you may not be doing a lot, but I highly encourage you to do this. Many of you at home have a mirror in your house or home. I want you to stand in front of that mirror. Look at yourself. Practice talking as if you're at an interview. Okay? Look at yourself. Look at the body position. Look at the eyes. Look at the height of your chin. Is it down? Is it up? Is your shoulder shrugged? Is it high? And listen to your speech. Especially for Korean Americans who the English is a second language and you don't feel confident about the English, speaking your English level. It's really important regardless of how good your English proficiency is, to stand in front of a mirror and just practice. Now, today we have lots of technology, so another technique that you can do is to just record a video of yourself talking and then listen to it. And then listen to it again. And then practice again. And listen to it again. And believe it or not, I don't have any proficiency issues with English because I've been living here since I was 8 years old. However, even though English is comfortable for me, before I give a seminar or a speech, I actually record myself giving that seminar. And I watch it again. I think about where can I improve? And I do that again. And then I do it again. Just like an athlete, let's say you're a basketball player and you're really practicing three-pointer. As you know, in sports, repetition makes perfection. Same thing in a professional career, just like an interview or communication skills. You got to repeat, you got to practice. If you're not willing to practice, you're not willing to repeat and to reflect and to improve, then you're not going to get better no matter how much books you read, no matter how many YouTube videos you watch, because really in reality it comes to building your own skills that only comes from practicing it yourself. Another very practical tip I have is schedule a mock interview. That could be with someone at your school, a counselor. That could be a friend who's coaching you and guiding you. It could be perhaps your family member. Regardless of who it is, do not skip the part where you're doing a mock interview. And do not treat that experience as if it's just another practice. Treat that as if that was a real interview, right? I think about an athlete. When they're practicing games, they play like it was a real game. That's important because you're preparing your mind and your physical body to know how to react under the pressure. So you got to put yourself in the pressure during the mock interview, okay? Last, another one is, when you are writing down and preparing your responses to an interview question, many of the young students that I meet or colleagues that I meet, they'll take a notebook paper and they'll write, all right, if someone asks me, tell me my strength, greatest strengths, they'll sit there and write a full sentence. My strength is blah, blah, blah. However, one of the keys to making sure that your interview responses appear to be authentic and real and confident is that do not memorize sentences, okay? You only need to write bullet points. What are your key points? Only write 1 or 2 words. If someone asks me this question, write down 3 key bullet points. Because when you no longer worry about remembering sentences and you only remember themes, it's going to be so much easier for you to speak to it. This happens a lot, especially for Korean Americans where they're still learning English. They have a confidence issue with English, right? So a lot of them will write full paragraphs. And they'll sit there at home and they'll try to memorize. Okay, if someone asks me this, I'm going to memorize this full paragraph as if it was a Bible verse. This is not how you practice interview, everyone. You practice interview by remembering key themes. Okay? Another one is you got to remember when you respond to a question that your responses are short and to the point. When you go interview with a company, they're really not there to just chit-chat. So for those of you who's Korean, chit-chat is a term that you may not recognize, but they're not there to just learn about your life and your personal interest. Although they're going to ask for that, especially at an American company, right? To break ice. They call it the breaking ice, icebreaker. However, every minute you have an opportunity to speak, you need to use it wisely to make sure that the company knows your brand, your personality, and what you bring to the table. What is it you bring to the table when you get hired? So the way you make your responses short and to the point is a method called STAR. S-T-A-R. In today's talk here, I am not going to go into full length on the technique called the STAR method. There are many YouTubes and materials online that teaches you about STAR method. Okay, so I encourage you to go into Google and study what STAR method is. But I will do a quick introduction to get you started. S in STAR stands for situation. No matter what questions they ask you, you first have to give the context, right? So what situation is it that you're referring to? Describe the specific event or situation to set the foundation of the story that you're about to tell. T stands for task. Task refers to what were the specific actions that you had to take, or what was the goal that you're trying to achieve in this response that you're about to give. Many of you that are in school, a common question that you're gonna get is, tell me about a time in school where you needed to work in a group project and there was a conflict with a group member. Tell me how you overcame that conflict. So before you go right into what the conflict was, you first have to set the tone to help the listener understand the background, that which was the situation. And then in that situation of the project overview, you have to explain to the interviewer what were the goals of that project. Be very clear, be very succinct, short, concise. A in the STAR stands for action. What were the specific steps that you had to take to overcome that challenge? Okay? And really out of this situation, right, the STAR method, action may be one of the most important point. Because your ability to explain the actions and why you took those actions tells the company that you're interviewing for your ability to think. This is a step in which they're going to get a little insight to the way your logic works and the way you explain the actions you took and why you took it. And remember this, as a person getting interviewed, sometimes you feel like, oh, I wonder what the right answer is. Okay, in school, there's always a right and the wrong answer, especially taking a test. But in a professional environment, professional career, sometimes there's really not a right or the wrong answer. There's kind of the shades of gray, right? What is more important in determining someone's ability to be hired is, were they logical and were they able to explain their logic from their head to the other person? Okay? So think about why you took those actions and explain those actions very clearly. The R in the STAR stands for result. Now, it'll be great if every example you had great result. You saved cost. You increased productivity by 5%. You were able to start a business. You were able to make an A on your project. However, some of the best examples come when the results are not good. So don't discount examples in which you failed. However, here's an important part. Don't stop and say, well, I did X, Y, Z and I failed. If you stop there, there's a really good chance you're not going to get hired. How do you follow up a failure? You have to explain what you learned from it and what you're going to do differently next time. Why is this important? Because this tells your employer your ability to learn. It's called learning agility, flexibility, adaptability. Because we live in a business environment where things are constantly changing. And they want to make sure when they hire someone new that this person is going to keep up with the change, keep up with the constant battle, and that this person will constantly learn from experiences and not make that same mistakes again. So demonstrating what you learned and what you're going to do differently next time is a really good example of how you should respond to a typical interview question. So remember, STAR: situation, task, action, and results. Now, I know this is a virtual session and you will be watching a recording of me, but I'd like for you at this moment, pause this video and listen to the homework assignment that I'm about to give you. And this is really important that you do this. Here's your homework assignment or action plan. I want you to practice the method of STAR response. And this is how I want you to do that. Take a piece of paper, think about what I just taught you, what STAR represents. Here are some very common questions that come up in interview. And you can always Google and get more. I think that on Google there's like top 100 questions that come up in an interview process. But I just put the 5 here for you to get started. For these questions, write down your responses using STAR. If you keep practicing that, you will help yourself to respond in a concise, to the point, and easy to understand responses. So questions could be, tell me about yourself. Another question could be, what are you looking for in a job? Okay, another question could be, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Tell me your greatest weakness. Tell me your greatest strength. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with your team. These are very common questions that probably will come up, especially if you're a college graduate looking for that first job. If you're an experienced professional, some of these questions may not come up. It'll be more industry specific, and they will ask you specific things about your previous work. So if you're an experienced professional, think about your previous work history and think about what are the most obvious questions they're going to ask based on your resume. Because many times in an interview, they'll have a copy of a resume. And believe it or not, they probably have not read that resume until the time you show up for the interview. Why is that? Because they're all busy. They're all busy working. So they're not going to sit there and study who you are prior to you coming for that official interview. So think about it. They're reading your resume as you're sitting across the table from you. And they're going to start looking at some keywords. And they'll say, oh, you work for, I don't know, let's just say Google. Oh, I see that you did an IT project that increased the Google accessibility by 10%. Let's say you put that on your resume. You better be prepared to explain what you did to accomplish that 10% improvement or productivity gain by using STAR method. Give clear background, understand the task in hand, understand what actions you took, and then talk about what results you were able to gain. Another thing to think about is do not always talk about what the group accomplished, because this is a position in which they want to know what you did for that project. Now it's okay to talk about what the team, what the group was able to accomplish in a particular project that was challenging, but really highlight your own contribution to that success. And for Korean Americans, once again, I'm going to call this out. Koreans don't say I, right? They say we. or our, because we live in a Korean American culture is very team and family oriented, right? So if you say it in Korean, we always say things like 우리가. Okay, we never said 내가 했어요. We never say I did this, because it feels like you're bragging. Now, I don't know how it is in Korea and how you interview, but I will tell you, if you're interviewing in an American company, they don't care as much about what you did as a whole family. They want to know what you did. So get comfortable with bragging about yourself. Say things like, I did XYZ, and because I was able to execute to the project, I saw that productivity increase by 10%. That feels very, as you as a Korean American, that feels very unnatural. However, it's such an important thing for you to practice. Remember, Western American company, I is more important sometimes than we. Now, when you do get employed, right, it's all about teamwork, remember that. But in an interview, you have maybe 30 minutes, maybe 60 minutes to highlight your own contribution, because they're trying to hire you, not the team that you work with in your prior employment. So think about really highlighting your own contribution and how that helped the team. Okay? Very key point for a Korean American or Korean colleagues of mine.